Peace and light, that old guy Australia. Like, share, subscribe. YouTube and on Instagram. That old guy Australia. Hit the notification button and you'll know when I'm doing a video. Now, this is a video a bit different from what I'd probably normally record. But I offer no apologies for that. It's just something that came up this morning. Joe and I had a pretty in-depth conversation about a number of things. Sorry, when you wake up at 3:30, this is what happens. And it weighed heavily upon my mind, and I thought, well, it's a good chance for me to get this out there and see what you people think. And believe me, I have no qualms about your stance on what I'm about to share. And I've always said that I much prefer people to have an opinion. It's people who don't have an opinion that really get up my nose. It's very beige. Oh no, it'll be okay. Oh no, the government's fine. Whatever might be the case, If you don't have an opinion, then really you just annoy me. You're taking up really valuable oxygen, in my opinion. So, anyway, be that as it may. Right. Now, I'll preempt this a little by just saying that I'm not a relationship expert by any stretch of the imagination. And I want to give you a little background on this, just so you know where I'm coming from. Most of my life, initially growing up, I was a person who, for reasons unbeknownst to me, because you're young and you're really unaware of your situation and what had transpired in your younger years, etc., etc. But I seemed to be a person who really looked for attention, but not just attention, acknowledgement from my parents, for want of a better term. Now, unbeknownst to me, that I was adopted, part of the stolen generation, and I didn't know that at the time. And so hence, what I've since found out, it's easy. See, when you get up here, this is why this is a difficult video, because you've watched those movies where they're cutting back and forward between, and you got to keep track of the story, So it's kind of like that, and I apologise, I don't mean to jump around. But when I get up here, then I look back there, and when I had some psychology up here and it got shown back there, then I began to understand what had transpired back there, and that's what shapes you. So what had transpired prior to me moving into this family led me to the point where all I wanted to do was please. I was a pleaser. I wanted to be academic, I wanted to study hard. If I got 100% at school, I would take my report card home, which we did in those days, and have to be signed by your parent, remember? And if I got 100%, I felt quite confident that I would get some kind of praise, which I really did, I can tell you. And there are some people watching this video would have known my mother growing up in far south coast. But if I got 99% or 98, 97, I rarely got anything less, honestly. I always felt like I'd failed. I didn't even want to give them a report card because I didn't get 100%. And so it was like I had that affirmation within my soul at an early age that 100% was all that was acceptable, nothing else. 100% or nothing. And so even that took that into sport. And I never felt good enough. I played soccer, played pretty well. I played up here in Sydney, one level below, a level called Dallimore, which is one level below state soccer, but was never good enough to make the state side or even look like getting in there. So always felt, like I just never made it. I played pretty good golf, won some, my share of some amateur tournaments, but was never good enough to be a pro, even a bottom rung pro, like say an Australian pro who, because they go on to Europe and America and wherever else. So I was never even good enough for that. And so this kind of, I guess, assumption about things permeated my entire life, and it has done ever since. And here's something that you might get, and I'm going to go again, jump back and forward a little bit, right back up until when I got married. Again, I never felt like I was a successful parent, never felt like I was a successful husband, couldn't control the situation around my marriage, which was in dire trouble from day one. And I had no idea how to fix it. I couldn't fix it. I didn't know what to do, and try as I might to run that marriage and my family along certain principles and lines, which I'd I guess ingrained within myself through a religious experience. It just didn't work, and I couldn't. There was no way I could get this. It was kind of like trying to get a positive to match with a negative. It just wouldn't fit, and I could not fix it. And that's the most difficult thing for a lot of men, particularly, as we'll just say Australian people I know. They're in a situation where they don't have the knowledge or the tools to remedy a situation. And so, as is the way with Australian men, for argument's sake, they fall back on that, guffawing and laughter and drinking and barbecues and whatever. And it's like this whole show. It really is just theatre. But you get them one-on-one, and I've done that thousands of times with men right around Australia. Get them one-on-one, and they're different. They're so different. There's issues there. And if you can get them talking, you can pull a few scabs off here and there, and suddenly they begin to open up to you. And I had a lot of people say to me, particularly men now, how is it you get to think the way you think? I mean, it's a different kind of thinking that you do. How do you bring yourself to understand this stuff? And so in a brief outline, I went through a period where I'd found out I was adopted. My entire world crumbled. I can assure you, it was like it just disintegrated. Because everything had been hidden from me, and everything that had been happening in my life, which included psychological abuse, some of the most horrendous, and I mean horrendous, and I'm under exaggerating, some of the most horrendous physical abuse that you could conjure up, and sexual abuse. And so I had this happening, and there were people who knew about this and said nothing, including school teachers, and they said nothing. But when it came out accidentally one day, because I'd been threatened and told that if I'd said a word to anybody, then life's over as far as you know it, son. And so when this whole thing caved in, and I found out I was adopted accidentally from my auntie, and she was horrified because she blurted this out, and it hadn't even blurted it out. She'd said it in a very offhand kind of way, but I was the one who reacted to her comment, and then she was shocked, like, "Oh my God, you didn't know? You didn't know?" And I'm like, "Didn't?" And I'm sitting there with my beautiful auntie who I loved, and had this enormous realization she wasn't my auntie, and my uncle wasn't my uncle, and I loved them to bits. I wish I had been their child, and it was like the bricks just started, falling away, and everything just crumbled. Your brother wasn't your brother, hence the way he treated me. Your parents weren't your parents, hence the way they treated me. Everything, there was nothing real. And at the centre of that, when everything fell away, and it was just this pile of demolished bricks. Sitting right in the centre was little me going, well, then who am I? Who am I? And I had no way of dealing with any of this living on the far south coast. There were no professionals I could go and talk to. There was no, internet. There was no video hookups. There was nothing in those days. So there was a hell of a lot of men who abused their wives, I can tell you that, in that little town. And I know who they are, and you probably know who they are if you're watching this from the south coast. There were a lot of abuse, tremendous amount of drunken abuse and violence amongst families in those days. And so nobody wanted to know anything. They didn't want to even talk about it, let alone acknowledge anything. So it took me to leave that town. And I had an incredible religious experience at a little Anglican church there in Narooma one Easter Sunday, 1985. And irrespective of anything that's happened before or anything that's happened since, that brief moment in time, that 1 hour period, I can never deny. And that 20 seconds or a minute or so back in the manse, I can't deny. I can't necessarily explain it in words that you may comprehend, but I cannot in any way deny what transpired. That was something for me, and it was pure. It was so pure I can't even explain to you. I don't have the words, but let me tell you that that moment has never left me and never will leave me, because it can't. It can't ever leave me. And for those of you who understand the Bible, Jesus said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and those who open the door I shall enter and never leave." So it doesn't matter what you do to a certain extent. That's what happens. Now, I'm not wanting to put a religious slant on this. I'm going to tell you this much, because we're each going to have to, row our own boat. But what followed was me heading into a Christian organisation that, and marriage, and I tried to, and I went to a number, we're talking over a period of time, hundreds of various seminars and all sorts of things, where you do really learn an incredible amount of stuff. And I did. I learned a lot about myself, about people, about life. It doesn't necessarily mean I was able to put those things into practice, or that I was able to live up to those things. In fact, au contraire, as they say, on the contrary, I couldn't. And that was part of the problem. That with my marriage falling apart around me from day one and everything going horribly wrong, I found I could not live up to what I thought was the expectations of what I was being taught. And that created the most horrendous dichotomy. And it was just, and that brings about an enormous amount of shame and an enormous amount of guilt, and that permeates you as well. And that permeates your relationships with your family, with your wife, with your friends, with your children, everything. And it's like no matter how things are going, right, there's this truth in your head playing. This is all bullshit, mate. This is all bullshit. This isn't real. You know it. And so that's how those years progressed. And of course my marriage fell apart, and then there was enormous amounts of issues with relationships, and I went through this enormous struggle over about a 5-year period where I went looking for myself, and I didn't know how to do it. I thought sex might have been the answer, but that didn't work. Various relationships fell apart, and it was just a nightmare. I had no way of righting the ship, and I believe that, for want of a better term, the enemy had me right where he wanted me, in that confused and dazed state where I was of no value to anybody and no good to anyone. I was no good to my children. I was no good for my friends. I was no good to myself, and I couldn't right my own ship. And it took me a period of time where I moved to Queensland and spent some time with a wonderful man who I call my grandfather. He's not biologically, but I call him my grandfather. And he is the most beautiful, gentle Christian man, and he spoke a lot. He spent a lot of time with me. We worked together for years, and he spoke a lot into my life. And the thing was, because I respected him and took notice of him, those words that he spoke into my life had an impact, had a tremendous impact on my life. And they found little places within me to lodge, and those things that were meant to lodge in there did, that are still there today. He spoke those into my soul. So moving forward from that, everything is a level. If you think as a painter, I think in terms of a ladder, going up rungs, up rungs, up rungs. And everything's like that. And life itself can want to keep you on a certain level. And that the powers that be within this world want everybody to keep on a certain level. And we used to always use the analogy we did in the church that you cannot soar like an eagle if you're scratching around with the chickens, And it's like that. If they just keep you down here and keep you somewhat happy and keep you somewhat not questioning and not growing, then they can control you down here. But it's only those who step out from that and step away from that. I was saying to Joe this morning, we've all got situations with friends and with family and others where, okay, I'll say this again. I apologise. I got sidetracked there. I'll start by saying this. And this is no greater statement, I believe. This is, if I ever said one wise thing in life, and I probably haven't, but this, if I did, self-deprecation, you see, isn't that a trait? Isn't that a trait of lack of self-worth? Self-deprecation. If I ever said one wise thing in life, this is it. And this is something you can take to the bank, and I swear this is as true as you'll ever get from me. If your self-worth is determined by somebody else's opinion of you, you are in a bad, bad place. Now let me say that again. If your self-worth is determined by somebody else's opinion of you, you are in a bad place. That's fact. That's absolute fact. You see, once somebody else can dictate to you and control you, and that can be through guilt or mainly emotional guilt. If they can control you through that, or if they've got a lack of, let's say they're harbouring some form of hatred towards you or anger towards you or unforgiveness towards you, if they have that, and that's the glasses that they put on every time that they look at you, then they will continue to hold you in that circling pattern. And what you need to understand is that they too have to go and grow. They have that. They have to go and grow. They've got to work through their own issues. You need to understand that once you've apologized, once you've dealt with that over there, that's no longer your issues. You can walk out of that. You can step up a rung, wash your shoes and go, no, I'm not being held. I cannot be held where you are simply because you're not dealing with issues you need to deal with. If you're going to sit there and you're going to wallow in that and you're going to keep that as part of your nature, I do not have to be a part of that. I can rise out of that. I can rise above that, and I will. And I'll step up. But what I'm willing to do is reach down and say to you, here's a hand. I want you to come up here. I want you to come out of there. I want you to step up here with me. And if we can go up even another rung a little higher, the view is that much better. The air is that much cleaner. You know, I know it sounds cliched, but I'm telling you, this is absolute truth. It really, really is. When your self-worth is determined by somebody else's opinions, you're in trouble. You need to understand your own self-worth. You need to understand who you are. You need to understand what is needed from you for you to grow, for you to go forward. And if that means that some of those situations have to be left behind, even if only temporarily, then that's simply how, I guess that's how it has to be. Short-term pain for long-term gain. I'm the cliche king. So Joe and I had a wonderful discussion about this morning. Jo has a brilliant mind. She really, really does. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman. And I went through probably the first 10 years of my relationship with Jo with a tremendous amount of low self-esteem, a lack of self-worth. I would often say to Jo, I don't understand why you want me in your life. Now, what a terrible thing to say to somebody. But I was only speaking out of my own hurt. I was only speaking out of my own guilt, my own remorse, my own lack of self-worth, self-esteem. And I was speaking it. But again, it's that spoken word. I was speaking it. Now, here in Australia, particularly with men, you'll hear this over and over and over right throughout society, where they say Australian men are strong, they don't like to cry, they don't like to speak about emotions and emotional things, they just don't want to do it, and they keep reiterating this. It's like a force field around us, and they speak it, they write it in books, they put it on the TV, they have it in newspapers, they have it everywhere. People will speak about this at barbecues. It's like it's constantly being reinforced in men that they are these kinds of people. And I know a lot of men like this who, I can tell you, they're pretty tough guys. They're weak as piss. I apologise, but that's really the truth. They are weak. And they're weak because their strength is a false strength. Their weakness lies in the fact that their character's flawed and they're not willing to fix it. I have tremendous amount of faults. I have a tremendous amount of flaws. And I remember once a wonderful speaker who's since no longer with us, I don't think. And I remember him saying, if you just want to work on yourself, you've probably got 50 things you could do. And you look at that and you think, I cannot overcome these 50 things till the day I die. So you just pick one. Just take one and work on that. And if you can work on that one thing, right, until you get to a point where you either overcome it or you at the very least You've worked it out, smoothed the edges off, and got that sorted. Don't give yourself a timeline for that. And once you've done that, take another issue and go, right, now for this one. One step at a time. Right? So that's how I've gone. Now that may not be obvious or apparent to many, many people, including a lot of people who knew me growing up or in my past. That may not very well be that apparent. But my self-worth is not determined by their opinion of me. That's of no value. A lot of people's opinion of you is based within their own failings. It really is. Now, if they don't deal with those issues, that's not on you. That's not on me. That's not me. That's you, mate. And so these men who appear to be tough men, really, if you ask them crucial questions about morality and character and life, they can't answer. They really can't answer. And I've sat with many, many men and had these discussions, and they've struggled, really struggled, to give valid answers. That's all I had to say. But I want you to know that once you start this process, it's like losing weight. People go, I've got to lose 20 kilos. And they go, well, that's not going to happen. Well, that's to say 2 kilos. Let's just say I've got to lose 2 kilos and then I have a celebration. I don't mean 20 party pies and a bottle of bloody rum. You know, high five will do. You know, there's no calories in that. I'm simply saying if you set small goals and achieve them, you will rise throughout what you're meant to do in this life a lot quicker. You'll achieve a purpose a lot quicker. You'll become a lot quicker if you just set some small goals. Okay? And I can tell you now that Joe and I, this massive building that we have here now in place of the old home, sitting here right now, Joe and I are multi-millionaires. We own the one next door, which we've sold, but we haven't settled. So we own that next door. So we're literally multi-millionaires. Yet when the dust settles on all this, we'll have nothing left. By the time we pay everything off, sell that, pay everything off, get it all settled, we'll have nothing left. But we'll have this here as a base for friends and for family. They'll have somewhere to call home. It's different to the old home. It hasn't got the character, but it has a ton of room. That's one thing. And it has value on it, and it's an asset. So that's fine. But Joe and I will be starting on a journey. We're having a chat about it this morning. So we're patiently waiting. We're patiently waiting for that time in the next couple of months, let's say, when things are going to sort themselves out and reveal to us what our future is going to be. And we're pretty excited about it because it's going to bring about enormous changes through our daily routines and through dietary things and through mainly our view on things. We have to change. We know that we have to change these things. So when all this is dealt with and we take this massive body backpack off and drop it on the ground, then we know we're going to be free in not very long. And we're actually looking forward to that tremendously. So I just want to encourage you this morning, take a little step. If you're going to lose weight, make it 2 kilos. And just set about doing that. Don't forget, every single movement you do, whether it's moving your hands or whatever it might be, takes energy. And energy has to be produced. And I don't care if it's just walking around your block, or around the house, or going outside. Don't be too sedentary, but look to set yourself a small goal. If you want to start to change within yourself, think about something, be self-critical and think about something that you could work on within your own life. You might be like me, very selfish. And Joe will say to me now, you're far too generous. Well, maybe I've swung a little to the other side, but that's preferable to what I was. I was a very selfish person, incredibly selfish. I was the only thing and the only one that mattered. And that's to acknowledge that was incredibly difficult. And that's a start. And if you know anything about alcoholism, the first step for an alcoholic is to recognize that they're an alcoholic. That is the hardest thing for them to do. Believe it or not, that's the hardest thing to do. But until you take that step, there can be no going forward. All right? Peace and light, that old guy Australia. Thanks for listening and watching. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification button, and you'll know when I'm doing a video.